Hello and welcome to our second session on AWS. Today we'll learn about a few compute and a few storage services such as EC2, Lambda, S3 and LightSail. So we'll try to perform few tasks on the AWS console. So let's get started. So today we'll launch a Windows server on EC2. Like it's Elastic Cloud Compute. So we'll launch the server and try to access that server. And also later we will deploy a Python code on Lambda and test that Lambda function. And next we will create an S3 bucket on AWS and try to configure the bucket and try to upload a file. And finally we'll try to launch a server using LightSail, which allows us to launch a server with very few steps. Now let's try to launch a server on AWS using Amazon EC2. So in order to access it, either you can select from here or just search for EC2 on the search bar. Click on EC2. So if you scroll down a bit, you can see the option to launch an instance. So let's click on that. So let's give it a name. And so if you scroll down below, you can choose the operating system the server would have. So for simplicity, let's select Windows, but you can select any of the operating systems available here. So, and also you can search for Amazon machine images which were created by community members pertaining to certain use cases. And let's select the the architecture. So let's stick to the one which is recommended. And if you scroll down, we can choose the instance type. So basically instance type, various instance types would have different configurations such as memory or the number of CPU cores, and also the network capabilities, and also the prices would vary based on the instance type that you choose. So we have many available instance types, pertaining you can have very high CPU memory, like going up to 192, and there would be even larger 384. There are even larger instances. But for learning purposes, let's stick to free tier. So the free tier is free for almost an year. So let's say you can keep it. The server can be turned on, and for the next 1 year you won't be charged for that instance. So let's select the free tier option. And key pair is used to would be used to log into the instance. So this would be kind of a key, as the name suggests. So for this test, let's create a key pair and just give it a name and save this. You would need this in order to access the server. So let's save this key. Network settings is where you define the security rules. So where you want this server to be accessed from and who can access this. So all those things you can define here. And as we are using Windows Server, we would need a remote desktop rule to access the server, because Windows servers can be only accessed by this protocol. So we need to make sure that this rule is being enabled. And like for simplicity, I'll open it to like entire public network, but you can define the IP, like this is my current IP, so I can select it so that this remote desktop can only be accessed from this IP for security reason. But for now, let's select this. And here you can choose the size of the GPU. Like there are different sizes available. So sorry. So you can have like 30 GB, you can have anything like 60 GB, or as much as you need. And you can choose the storage type, like EBS type. So let's select the GP2, and GP3 is the newer version. So, and if we select on additional settings, so spot instance is another pricing model wherein the AWS would rent the servers which are available, which are not being used by different, like not being very much used, at a discounted price. You should only consider spot instances for like non-critical or some testing purposes. Even then it would be a little tricky, but if you are like really tight on budget, you can use it. The major drawback of using spot instances is you might lose that server anytime. So there are use cases where people would use the spot instances. You can create the domain, like usually, let's say in our Stevens, all the computers are can be accessed by every student by entering the credentials. So so directory, like we can have something similar setup on our servers, wherein people with certain credentials from only from that company can access it. So you could do that. Instance profile is it's something like a execution role attached to the instance, which would have permissions. And these are like various configurations which you can define. Shutdown behavior, like let's say if someone clicks on shutdown on the system, what the function should be. So it's always safe to have the stop. And we can also have the hibernate, like we can also make the server hibernate. But in order to do that, your EBS volume needs to be encrypted. Termination protection, which as the name suggests, it would prevent from accidental termination of the server. And all the other things we will discuss later. And user data is a script which can be run when the server is launched. So now, as everything seems good, let's click on launch instance. So this would take some time, and even though so the instance has been launched, but it would take some time to come up. So right now the status is in pending, and these are the details about our server. So the first one being this is the public IP of the server, and this is the private IP in the server. So yeah, let's give some time, and let's check the status again. So now the server is running. Let's try to access this server. So in order to access it, you need to select the instance and click on connect. So there are like different options through which you can access. So there is EC2 serial console and RDB client. Let's try to use RDB client today. Uh, so in order to do that, let's download the remote desktop file, or else you could also access this server using the remote desktop connection app on your Windows laptop or computer. So in order to do that, we need to enter the public IP, so which would be so this is the public IP of the remote desktop, and let's enter the public IP. Click on connect. So we need to enter the credentials. To get the credentials, under RDB client, you can see that the username is administrator. So let's add that. To get the password, we would need the encryption file. We would need the key file. So let's upload the key file which we created when we launched the instance. So decrypt password. So this is our password. So let's copy it and paste it over here and click on OK. Yes. So our server is just started running. So we have accessed the server. So from here on, you can configure your server for your use case. So let's close it. Close the connection for now. And the other way to access this server is by using the remote desktop file. You can just download it, and once it's downloaded, you can just click on the file, and you need to enter the password. Yeah, so we have accessed the server, and these are the details of the server which would be displayed over here. So let's close the connection. Again, in order to shut down, you can just click on shutdown over here under power. So let's see how to terminate the instance once you are done with your work. So let's go back to the instance page. So in order to delete, you need to select it and click on actions. And it should be under instance type. You can just choose like you would want to stop, reboot, or terminate. If you click on terminate, it would completely delete the instance. And these are the various configurations of the server. If we go to the security, you could define the security rules. Right now, only 3389 port is allowed, which is RDP port. from anywhere. So zero, I mean, this thing means it is public to the entire internet. Like anyone who is connected to the internet can access this server. And you can change the security settings by just clicking on the security group here, and you can add the inbound rules. Like let's say you would want to allow different kind of protocol, you could do that, or else you can add a different rule, and you can configure them. And if we go back to the instance, yeah, so again in networking, these are like you can find these details. Network interface is like the uh, LAN towards like either internet internet interface on your computer. So, and also under storage, like you can see the 30 GB volume is being attached, and you can add the tags based on your use case. And now let's try to terminate the instance. So we have selected the instance and click on instance and terminate. And once you click on terminate, the entire instance would be deleted. So yeah, we get the error that the RDP session has ended. So yeah, like if you can see the status, like it's currently shutting down. After some time, you would get the status saying that the instance has been shut down. So now let's create an AWS Lambda function on the AWS console. So today we will, deploy a sample code in Python, test it, and briefly discuss about the various configurations that you could do on the Lambda console. So this is the AWS portal, and this is the console homepage. So in order to create a new Lambda function, you need to go to Lambda here, or you can just search in the search bar Lambda. So you can choose either. So let's click on the Lambda from the search bar. So I have already created few sample Lambda functions. So in order to create a new Lambda function, click on create function. And there are multiple options that you can do. You could create a Lambda function from scratch. You could use a blueprint, or you can import a container image or create a container image. So let's create the Lambda from scratch. Give it a name. So let's call it testing. And now here you need to choose the runtime. Like you can choose any language that you are comfortable with. So for this tutorial I'm choosing Python 3.1. And architecture, I usually keep it the default one, which is 86 by 64. And while choosing the default, I mean choosing a execution role, it's a best practice to always create a new role. But if you would want to use the same role across across multiple Lambda functions, you could do that too. But for this session, we'll be creating a new execution role. So what this execution role does is, let's say you would want to, let's say our Lambda function needs to access some data from a database. This Lambda function should have permissions to access that database. So with an execution role, we can define those permission. We can give those permissions to that Lambda function, so that the Lambda function can access, maybe read or write on the database. So let's in the future tutorial, I'll explain you like how you can attach a policy or how you can attach a custom policy, like wherein you would define the rules. Under advanced settings, let's ignore them for now, and let's create the function. Okay, so this is how it looks once the function is created. So this is where you would uh, deploy your write your code, and on the left, this is your repository, and yeah. So let's copy a sample sample Python code and test it. So this is the sample Python code that I have created. So let's just paste that one over here. In order to run any code on AWS Lambda, there are few things you need to consider, because it's slightly different than running your code on your maybe local machine or a server. So as you can see, there is one this function which would take the event or the context. So usually Lambda functions are triggered by an event. It could be through API. It could be someone triggering some other AWS source triggering that Lambda function. So we'll define various values or various inputs in this event. So for this example, I have created this sample Python wherein the Lambda Lambda would take inputs of the name and age, and if it's above 18, it would say you are an adult, or else it would say you are a minor. So once you are satisfied with the code, you can click on deploy. This would deploy your code, and this would be live. So whenever someone tries to trigger this Lambda, this is the code which would be running. So in order to test, we will have to click on test. But before that, we need to create a test event. If you are testing for the first time, you automatically get this pop-up wherein you need to create the test event. So let's give it the name as test event. And here we need to add the JSON. So it would be name and the age. So these two would be the inputs. So name would be Ravi, which is my name, and age is 26. I'm not 26 years old, but yeah. So let's save and click on test. Okay, there seems to be some error. Okay. Okay, so let's configure the event. So the error was I was actually sending the input as a string instead of an integer. So because of that, we were getting the error. So click on save. And if you go back and test again, see, you can see that you are getting the output. And let's say if you'd want to test it with different inputs, you can do that. click on save and click on test. So let's take the different scenario wherein it would be 16. Click on save and click on test. So we are getting the other scenario too. So this is how you deploy the Lambda function. It's simple. There are this is the simplest Lambda function, but there are many complicated things which the function could do. So now I will explain how you could configure your Lambda function. So this is the code section where you would define your code, and if you go to the test is where you create the test event and give the test data and monitor. So monitoring is it gives you the detailed executions of the Lambda function, how many times the Lambda function was invoked and what was the success rate, what was the error rate. So you get different details about each trigger event. And if you would want to see the logs, let's say there has been an error and you would want to you would want to go through logs, like why the error happened. So for that, you'll have to click on CloudWatch logs, view CloudWatch logs, and you would get the logs pertaining to that Lambda function. And this was the latest trigger that happened. So once you click on it, you would get all the details about, there was an error. So it said, it shows why the error happened. So it was, we were sending the string input, the input was string instead of the integer. And the other, as we didn't try to log anything on the console, on the log page, it just shows the start and end thing. But you could modify your code such that it would display additional information. So once that is done, so this is the monitor page, and this is the configuration, and this is one of the critical console. So here you can define what memory the Lambda function can use, what is the timeout. So this timeout, after 3 seconds, let's say if the code has not been fully run yet, the function would stop. So if your function needs to access some data and there is a delay in that, it's always better to keep this execution, timeout time, as high as possible. And you could also as we discussed, you could also assign a role over here, or you can modify the role. And triggers. So as I already mentioned, the Lambda function can be triggered by different events. Those could be changes in the database, or through an API, or some other service invoking the Lambda function. So in order to assign a trigger to this event, click on add trigger, and you can choose various services which you would want to get this trigger be generated from. So you can choose various AWS services. So that's one thing. And permissions, as I already told, we can define we can assign some permissions to the Lambda function so that it can access certain resources. So if you would want to attach some permissions to the Lambda function, just click on the role. Here you can add the permissions here. So let's say I would want this Lambda functions to have access to all the S3 buckets. So for that, you can just click on add permissions, click on attach policies, and here you can select some predefined policies. So if you just search S3, you would get Amazon S3 full access, so which gives this Lambda function like full access, like full read and full write access. So you can just select that and click on add permission, and that permission has been assigned to this Lambda function. You could also create your inline policy, which would be only working on this Lambda function. Also, while attaching policy, you could also create a new policy, which we will learn later how you can create policies on IAM. So yeah, and environment variables. So this is where you define some sensitive information. Let's say your code is accessing some database, and that database has some login credentials. So it's insecure, like if you save those credentials in the code, because anyone who has that code would get the access to that credentials. So in order to avoid that, you can define some environment variables, wherein you give the key and value, and you can mention that, like the username is the key and value is admin, and you can also define a password, and write the password over here, and you just need to call this key in your Lambda function, and it would take that value which you have defined here. So tags are very critical. If in large organizations, tags helps us to segregate the resources according to different needs. So let's say an HR team is working on a project, and you would want to see like how much budget they are consuming. So you can just add tags saying that department and the department value as HR. In that way, you can let's say department and value being HR, and once you define it, like all the resources with this tag and value, this key, this tags, you can segregate them. So it will make it easier to get the bigger picture. So yeah, so those are the basic functions which we would want to discuss. And if we go back to the code, and there is an also option, like you can actually upload your the entire repository from your local machine. You can also, like, let's say there is a repository which is running on your system, and you would want to import it to the Lambda. You can just import the zip file. Also, you can save those repositories in an S3, and you can just pick that files from S3. And so yeah, that concludes. And also you can also export the function. Let's say you would want to save your function somewhere in your local machine, like you can export the function, and this would download the entire package which is being running over here. So that can be done. So yeah, I think that concludes our a brief demo on Lambda testing, and we'll be doing more and more exercise on Lambda in coming sessions. So now let's talk about AWS S3. As we already discussed, AWS S3 is used to store data as objects. So now we are on the AWS console. To access the S3 console, if you have recently visited, you can just select here, or else you can just type in S3 on the search console and select S3. So in order to create a bucket, a new bucket, click on create bucket, and now let's give it a name. Let's call it this name has to be unique across entire AWS. So we need to, like, it's something similar to an email address. And now you need to choose the region. It's always recommended to choose the region which is closest to your end customers. So like there are so many regions that you can select from, and we can select US East 1, North Virginia. And let's keep this as default, and I mean the recommended setting for now. And by default, the public access is blocked for security reasons. So like with public access being blocked, let's say if someone has the URL of your bucket, or URL of your object, or the data in it, they won't be able to access it without without they having some permission. So they need to have some permissions to access these resources. And for bucket versioning, so like as we already discussed, let's say with bucket versioning disabled, let's say if you try to upload a file and try to re-upload another file with the same name, if you do that with the bucket versioning disabled, the earlier file would be replaced, it would be completely gone. But let's say if you have enabled bucket versioning, let's say if you have re-uploaded a file with the same name, like you would have like both versions, the earlier and the new one that you had uploaded. So like for simplicity, let's disable it, but for your use case you may or may not have to enable this versioning. And tags, as we already discussed, like tags helps us track the resources, so you can add any additional tags that you want. So with encryption, so as we already know, like any data, we would want to make sure that it's highly secure. So the data in S3 is we call it as data at rest. So like let's say if you are making any if you're using, and let's say if you are uploading or downloading some file, you are actually sending that data through a secure channel which is already encrypted. Like nowadays most of the like HTTPS, like any website with HTTPS with this thing, those sites are secured and those are encrypted, so you are like no one would be able to access that data. But once this data reaches your end destination, it should also be encrypted, because let's say if someone gets a hand of that hardware device, they might be able to access that data, and now we would want to prevent it. So when you store some data on S3, you have options to encrypt it, like various options. The first one being the encryption is managed by Amazon itself, like you don't have to worry too much about it. But the second option is wherein you create a encryption key using this AWS key management service. So this service is another AWS service wherein you can manage various security credentials. So you could do that. So for simplicity, like let's just select the first one. So dual layer server-side encryption, it's an advanced encryption provided by again AWS key management service. So Yeah, with the bucket key, this basically it reduces whenever it reduces the internal API calls to KMS service. So it's an you can keep this enabled to lower your cost. And for advanced settings, object lock, as we discussed earlier, with let's say with object lock enabled, these objects would be prevented from being deleted, no matter what. Or we can configure the time settings such that no one would be able to modify those files. So this would be required for compliance or maybe regulatory requirements. But for simplicity, let's just disable it. And once you have configured all your inputs, click on create bucket, and our bucket is created now. So let's access the bucket. So this is our bucket, and right now we don't have any files. So let's try to add some files to this bucket. In order to add some files on the console, you can just click upload. And here either you can add the entire folder or just files. So click on add file. So for now, let's just upload this file. And for permissions, right now you can't configure, but you could modify these settings if you had chosen the other policy. Storage classes. So this is like different pricing or different use case classes which you can use. So let's say for for standard storage class, the same object would be replicated in different zones inside a region. With this, let's say if one availability zone goes down, you would have two more which would have your data for redundancy purposes. From intelligent tiering, I'll explain it in a while. With standard IA, so this is for if the data is not frequently accessed, then you can use standard IA, which would cost less, as you would be making very little API calls. And one zone IA being the data would be only present in one zone, and let's say you can just and it would only be let's say you would want to store something which are not very sensitive and which are easily recreatable data. You can use this in order to lower your cost. And all the other glacier type of all the glacier type of classes can be used to access the data where you won't be needing right now. You just want to save it for the long period. And this is the minimum storage duration for each class. And reduce redundancy, again, you can use this for data which are not critical and which are frequently accessed. And again, here also you can specify any specific encryption key that you would want to use. For now, let's just keep it default. Let's not talk about additional checksums now. Tags, again, you can give the tags based on your use case. And click on, and also you can add any metadata to your file if needed, and click on upload. So let's remove this and click on upload. So we have successfully uploaded the file. Let's go to the bucket and see that the file is being present. So let's click on this object file which we just uploaded. So this would be the URL of this object file, and these are the other configurations of that file. So let's try to open this URL. So in a new tab, see, you get that the access has been denied because we had blocked all the public access to the S3 bucket by default. So even though someone has this URL, they won't be able to access it. Let's see how we can change this. So, and also in permissions, you can configure the ACL access control list according to it. Like, we'll discuss all these things later. So now let's try to make that object public. So to do that, let's go to permissions, and if you scroll down, let's edit the object ownership, and let's click on ACL's enabled. Click on acknowledge, and click on save changes. So we need to initially prevent this. We need to modify those policies, and let's go back to the object again, and under permissions, now you would be able to access the ACL. So if you had observed, we have not made the public we have not made the bucket fully public yet. Like, if you go back to the buckets permissions, you can see that the public access is still blocked, but we had just changed the policies such that anyone each object can we could make each object file public if we want to. Earlier we had to we didn't have that option. So I'll explain you. Let's go to the object and click here, and let's go to permissions, and click on ACL. And now see, you can see it's still, if we want to make it public, we are not able to get that option. So if we go back to the bucket again and click on permissions, and let's try to unblock the let's try to unblock the public access. Click on save. We need to confirm first. For the changes to apply, click on confirm. And if we go back to the objects again, and again, if you see, let's try to open this in a new tab. Even now the access is denied, even though we had made the bucket public. So in order to make this object public, we need to go to permissions, click on edit. And now here, you need to click on public access to everyone, like objects. If you want, you can also enable this. Click on I understand and click on save changes. And now let's say if you open this in a new tab, see, you got the download link. So this is the download link of the object file which we just uploaded. So that's one way of accessing a file uploaded on S3. Right now, you must have observed, once we clicked, we were able to download. But you can also configure your permissions such that you can make this file accessible only from certain IP address or only from certain IP range. So we could do that on S3 as well. So let's now talk about different things that you can do on AWS S3. So if you go to properties and scroll down, you could see that we can host a static website. Right now it's disabled, but if we enable it, and we just need to have like one file, which is index.html file. This would be our home page, and an additional error html file to showcase the error. So if we have those files, like we can host a public we can host a static website on S3, and the URL would be related to AWS, but we can attach this static website behind your domain address. So in the later exercise, we'll discuss on how we can do that. And so yeah, like this is like a simple exercise on AWS S3. So now let's try to launch a instance through LightSail. So it's LightSail allows you to launch an any server on AWS, like in like very few steps. So like either you can choose LightSail from here, or you can just search LightSail on the search bar and select LightSail. So this is the dashboard of LightSail, and let's try to create an instance. As you can see, you can create containers like such as EKS, Kubernetes or Docker. You can also create databases such as SQL and non-SQL databases. So, and also there are some, you can also create a load balancer to distribute your load, and storage options to like such as bucket, S3 bucket or disk, and also domain and DNS services, and also snapshots which would be used as backups. So now let's try to create an instance. So in order to create one, I have already created one. So this is the one which I had created, and it's running. So in order to create a new one, click on create instance, and here you have option to choose the operating system. You can choose Linux or Microsoft Windows, and also you also have options to either choose apps and operating system, or just the operating system. So as you can see, like let's say if you have a WordPress site, you can just choose this option, which can be used to deploy your WordPress website. Django, like let's say you have a Django running on, you would want to configure that, so you can have a custom made server for that purpose. So for simplicity, let's select Windows and just choose the operating system only. And you can either add a launch script. Launch script is something the server executes when the server is launched, so you can have that. Here you can choose the server type, like based on the RAM or the disk space that you want. So as you can see, like first 3 months are free. So let's go with the lowest one. Okay, so as it's recommending, let's go with this one. And that's all. Once you are done, click on create instance. So let's wait until the status of the server changes from pending to running. So now it's running. So click on the server. There are various options that you can use to connect to the server. So as we just launched the server, it will take some time to come spin up. So let's wait for some time. So in order to connect to the server, click on connect using RDP. So this would open your browser in a new window. So our server is up, and you can access the server using this browser. So now let's try to close the server. Let's try to close the connection to the server, and let's try to delete it. So in order to do that, you can stop. So now the server is stopped. So now we can go ahead and delete it. So select delete from here, and yes, delete the instance. So even when the server is stopped, you would be billed for the storage and the other things. In order to completely avoid those expenses, you need to delete the instance, and this applies not just to LightSail but also for an EC2 server. So today's exercise would be would exactly be the same thing that we performed today. So you'll have to launch a server on EC2, deploy any Python code on Lambda, create an S3 bucket and upload a file, and finally launch a server using LightSail. So that concludes our today's session. Thank you.